Hello, and welcome to the first episode in IOTA's FutureProof webinar series. At the IOTA Foundation, we are specialists when it comes to using new technologies to transform industries today. Through FutureProof, we want to share this knowledge with you. We're hoping that this will inspire new ideas and help you to understand how the Internet of Things and distributed ledger technologies can enable new business. At the end of each webinar, there will be a short section where our experts will answer your questions from the chat. I'm your host, Daniel Thompson-Ivoto from the engineering department at IOTA, and I'm happy to introduce you to Dominik Schiener. He's a co-founder of IOTA and has been deeply involved in distributed ledger technologies since 2012. His focus is to drive the real-world adoption of IOTA. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic and the screen over to Dominik.
Thank you for the introduction, Daniel. As was already mentioned, my name is Dominik Schiener. I'm one of the co-founders of IOTA, and today I will answer the question of why. With every introduction of a new technology, we always ask ourselves, why is this technology needed and what problem does it solve? Especially with distributed ledgers and cryptocurrencies, this question becomes even more important because, for one, they're very novel new technologies, and they're also introducing very novel new socioeconomic principles. And as such, this question becomes even more important for us to answer correctly. Especially with IOTA, our big focus is on combining the physical with the digital layer, combining the Internet of Things with the distributed ledger like the IOTA technology. So let's start with why we need IOTA for the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is probably one of the most fast to be adopted technologies out there. We can see this in particular with the kitchen that we have in our household. Think about your kitchen 5 or 10 years ago. Every device in your kitchen was not connected. It was not able to collect and transmit data, and it definitely was not connected to the internet. And now look at the kitchen today, where we have all of those different gadgets and IoT devices that are really making our lives easier by automating those mundane processes and by enhancing our experience within the kitchen. An example is like our smart Samsung fridge, where we can see the fill status of certain items. And when we go shopping, we can really know what to buy and what not to buy. Or we have a smart thermostat that can automatically adapt itself to the environment and change the temperature as needed. Or we have our Alexa smart home device that really helps us to automate these processes while cooking and just controlling our entire household via voice assistant. And everything is sort of interconnected via if this then that or similar protocols. But a big problem that we have with IoT today is that we have introduced these technologies at the cost of privacy and at the cost of security. Especially when it comes to privacy, and with the introduction of GDPR, we have become more aware that data is really one of the most important resources that are out there. And it is also one of the most valuable resources that are out there that we really need to protect. And when it comes to security, especially in IoT, this is a much, much bigger problem. Think about all of those billion-dollar companies that are out there that have huge budgets for IT, but are still prone to hacks. And we've seen this over the last few years, where some of our mission-critical infrastructure and some of the most important companies in the world were hacked and actually had serious economic problems coming from those hacks. An example is what happened with Maersk and their cyber attack, where they lost track of all their containers, or of our power grid, which is susceptible to attackers and can be taken down. Or even things like ski lifts, where hackers were able to take over the control system and hurt people seriously. The story behind all of this is that this is really just the start of cyber attacks and cyber warfare. A very scary future is really when the machines start turning against us. We have introduced all of these connected and smart, supposedly smart IoT devices, and we have a big problem, because what if those IoT devices are not doing what they're supposed to be doing? What if they actually turn against us and actually attack us? An example here is what happens when we have, for example, CCTV cameras or thermostats that, instead of doing their very simple purpose, which is to collect the temperature or to record a video, what if they attack the internet and are part of a large DDoS botnet? And this is really the reality that we are in today. And so we need to ask ourselves this question: is like, what is the price that we pay for adopting these IoT devices and for building these IoT systems that are prone to those attacks and that can actually be utilized against us? When it comes to the internet, the price that we paid was our privacy, was our data, and it was our identity. We have all of those large corporates that are actually utilizing our data and are monetizing it in a hugely profitable way. Now, when it comes to IoT, the price that we pay could really be lives, right? Because our mission critical infrastructure, which is really the backbone of everything around us, if it gets hacked or if it gets misused, it can really cost people's lives. And as such, we need to take this a lot more seriously, and we need to think about new ways on how we can improve our IoT systems and how we can improve our infrastructure. The reason why we are in this situation that we're in today is really because we have adopted IoT at the cost of security, and we have built IoT on flawed principles. The bad part about all of our IoT gadgets and devices is that they are not truly fit for the Internet of Things. They're primarily that their smartness comes primarily through the cloud. That means that without the cloud service that connects to the IoT device, the IoT device is no longer smart, right? It can no longer do the things that it's supposed to be doing. And even worse, the IoT device might not even work anymore. And as such, without a cloud, we don't have any smartness in our devices. And because of that, you also do not own your device, because the cloud at the end of the day owns your device. Another big problem that we have is that we've built a lot of our mission critical components on proprietary software, without having the proper vetting process of open source contributions and of open source ecosystems. And all of this combined introduces single point of failures. The problem with IoT is obviously we have millions of devices that use the same firmware, that use the same software and so on, that if there's a vulnerability in one component of the IoT devices, we can really take down an entire network. And that is really not where we want to go. What we want to have is really a resilient and adaptive network that is inherently secure. And that brings us to this point, decentralization. The ultimate goal for all of us is to move towards smart decentralization. What we have today is essentially smart centralization. We have smart devices, but we have a dumb network. The intelligence in the network only comes through the cloud, which is the central component that helps to analyze data and that helps in the decision-making for the network of devices. And a big problem that comes from this as well is that we don't have any interoperability. We have one IoT cluster of IoT devices that use one cloud provider, and we have another cluster of IoT devices that uses another cloud provider. And as such, those devices cannot communicate with each other. They cannot benefit from each other. And this is why we need to go towards this smart decentralization, where there's no single point of failure and where there's no cloud which acts as the primary decision-making point, which acts as the primary analytics and computation point. What we need to do is we actually need to share the data, share the resources within this network of IoT devices, enable machine-to-machine communication and connections, and really IoT devices smarter, not just the individual device. And through that, we get a resilient and intelligent network, which is the ultimate goal for all of us when it comes to the adoption of IoT and when it comes to the adoption of really secure technologies. And this is really the primary reason why distributed ledgers make so much sense for the Internet of Things. With the Internet of Things today, we have this inherent security problem that we need to think about how we can really fix this problem. And this is why distributed ledgers are really one part of the solution here, where we have a distributed ledger network which acts as a single source of truth. A distributed ledger is immutable. It cannot be changed. It cannot be faked. And as such, having such a trust component within the architecture of an IoT device that it can actually rely on brings huge benefits. And the feature sets that we're looking at for IoT are really three distinct components. The first one is trust in data. As an IoT device, I need to be able to trust, I need to be able to verify the integrity and the authenticity of the data that they receive either from the cloud or that they receive from other IoT devices. And that is always enabled through distributed ledgers. And coming from that, we can also start building decentralized identities that are for machines or for humans so that they can identify themselves, so that they also can really define what is their purpose, who is their owner, and what are their specific properties, and so on. The second component that we really need for IoT is machine-to-machine transactions. How do we enable it for one machine to store their own digital assets and to actually participate in an economy with other machines where they start trading resources with each other? One device might have excess storage capacity, might have excess computational capacity, and we want to enable this device to actually sell this resource to another IoT device that really needs it. And the third thing that we need in IoT is secure access control. We want to have programs, processes defined in these IoT systems that are verifiably true, right? We want to know what gets executed at each point in time. And we also want to have these secure audit trails to know who actually access certain functions and who participate in certain processes. And all three of those combined really bring trust into IoT. And this is a great start for us to start building towards a greater IoT network that is smart, that is secure, and that is really resilient. And this brings us to the second part of my presentation. Why do we actually need the machine currency? So far, we understood why distributed ledgers are really very important for the Internet of Things and why they solve an inherent trust problem in IoT today. Now, the second part is, why do we actually need a machine currency? Why do we want to enable machine-to-machine payments? Why do we not just use conventional payment methods in IoT today? So there's several reasons. The first reason, and the most obvious one, is that the Internet of Things is not about the internet. Even though it's in the name, IoT is all about utilizing new communication protocols for resource-constrained devices. And that really means that we want to have mesh networks. We want to have machine-to-machine communication where one device can communicate and transfer information to another device. And as such, the obvious conclusion is that we cannot build a financial system that relies on central server infrastructures that we have today. We cannot assume that an IoT device is going to send an API call to a banking server to transfer money from its bank account to another machine's bank account. That simply does not scale, and it simply does not work in this very resource-constrained environment. And as such, we need to be able to do machine-to-machine payments in a way where the settlement and the clearing is done within the network, meaning that all of those different IoT devices that are connected with each other actually provide the payment rails for all of the other IoT devices to participate in this machine economy and to actually participate in this transaction system. And that is really one of the primary reasons why we need a distributed ledger and why we need cryptocurrencies for IoT. Now, the second reason is one thing that we are doing very well in the business world always is to create new consortias, meaning that we bring a bunch of players together within an industry. They might be competitors, they might be friends, but essentially we want to create a consortium that rallies people behind a certain technology and a certain use case. And this might have worked up until now, but it will not work with distributed ledgers because distributed ledgers are all about open and free ecosystems, meaning that anybody can participate and that anybody can benefit from this piece of technology. Now, the big problem that we have with too many technologies, with too many consortia, and with too many cooks basically cooking their own pot, right, is that we are fragmenting the ecosystem. We are not benefiting each other. We are not actually contributing towards the success of the entire ecosystem. We're just trying to contribute towards the success of a very specific use case or for a very specific company. Now, what we really need is we need to have a universal standard whereby we have one payment rail with one protocol that is adopted, that is standardized, and that is security vetted by all of the different players, and that will serve as the backbone for all of these different use cases that we want to enable through distributed ledgers, because only through that we really make sure that we are able to capitalize on the full potential of this machine economy. Because at the end of the day, we do not want to have our machines become forex traders, right? Because we don't want to have them hold 10 different digital assets just to execute on one simple use case. We have very simple devices, and we need very simple solutions to enable these machine-to-machine payments and data use cases. So one standard for all is really what we need. The third reason why we need the machine currency is trust, right? What we do not have today is digital identities. And so think about a fully autonomous environment where we have one device trying to transact with another device. Now, how do we enable this economic transfer? The beauty of distributed ledgers and the real beauty of cryptocurrencies is that you do not need a contract between those two parties, but the payment itself is actually a way to mitigate the risks, the counterparty risks. And as such, you do not need to inherently trust the other party. You do not need a reputation or an identity system to enable your use cases, but you simply enable it through micropayments. So think about a very simple example whereby we have a charging station and we have a car. The charging station might fake that it's a real charging station, and the car might fake that it actually has the money to pay for the electricity. Now, the way that we create trust in this environment is through micropayments. Essentially, the car sends a small amount of money, digital assets, to the charging station. The charging station now verifies that it received the money. And now the charging station releases a small amount of electricity. And through this, we have this continuous flow of payment and of electricity, and the devices do not need to trust each other. But the use case and the economic transfer itself is enabled through micropayments. And now in the future, when we do have digital identities, this will obviously be further enhanced. And we can really go even deeper into most of these use cases and enable them even better. Now, the last reason why we really need cryptocurrencies is what I've already mentioned before, is distributed ledgers are all about permissionless innovation and permissionless ecosystems. The main thing that made the internet so great was that it was an open environment. Anybody could connect to it and anybody could build on top of it. All of the greatest companies that we have today, primarily coming out of Silicon Valley, they were really pioneers of these new technologies, and they were really pioneers of this ecosystem. And there was no restrictions on what they could build, but they were really given free rein on what they can innovate and what they can imagine to build on the internet. And the same is true with IOTA, and the same is true with all distributed ledger technologies that are permissionless. Because even as a creator of these technologies, you cannot always fully understand the potential of it and fully understand the use cases that will be enabled through it. Instead, we as the creators, we as the foundation or as the developers behind it, we need to create an environment whereby those developers, those innovators can utilize our base technologies and really create innovative new solutions that solve actual problems. And this is one of the most important aspects of DLT and really of digital assets, that we really need to make sure that this becomes the true ecosystem of the future. Because what distributed ledgers now enable is really, it removes the counterparty risks, and it allows us to exchange value, monetary value, freely across the world. And the companies that will be building on top of that will be some of the most successful in the world over the next decades. Now, as my last point, why IOTA? IOTA was created in 2015, and we came into this space knowing that there's a big problem, and the problem is, first of all, with the Internet of Things, where we need a distributed ledger, and for another, there's a problem with blockchain, and that is why we invented this new technology that goes beyond traditional distributed ledgers and hopes to create a technology that is really future-proof, as the title of the webinar is. Our core mission at IOTA is to enable this convergence of physical infrastructure and of digital infrastructure. We essentially enhance the physical infrastructure and make it even more powerful and make it more trustworthy and also make it more democratic. Our mission is to really benefit the society and the economy as a whole through our technology. For one, what we enable is we want to give people their own digital identities. We want to give people the power over their digital assets, meaning money and, more importantly, data. You can decide what happens with your data, and you can also monetize it if you want to. And the same is true with machines. We want to empower machines to collect data and to monetize this data, and to also offer their services within this large machine economy that we're building. And the backbone of all of this is obviously the IOTA technology itself. But for us, the primary focus is really how we can establish this backbone as a global, utilizable digital infrastructure layer. We really see IOTA as this ubiquitous protocol that will be utilized all around the world, and it will really enable all of these novel new use cases. Now, when it comes to the technology, here's a short overview of what it looks like. Our primary focus for this year is really to reach production readiness and make sure that the innovators, startups, and large corporates can utilize our technology and can utilize our building blocks to the full extent, and to really solve problems through the benefits that we offer, like being scalable, having no transaction fees, and also having no large energy requirements as other technologies. There's obviously still a lot of work to do from the foundation side, but we really see IOTA as a unique problem solver for businesses and also for society. And establishing a digital infrastructure layer itself is a huge feat. And we've been working on this since 2015. Here's an overview of what we've already achieved. So far, more than $180 billion was transacted through the IOTA network, which is obviously a big feat on its own, but there's still a lot more to do for us. And I think the most exciting part about the future of IOTA is really once our ecosystem starts becoming even bigger, and we have even more people utilizing our technology, benefiting others with the solutions that they're building, and also really building towards a future-proof society, which is more democratic, which is more fair, and which gives people equal opportunities all around the world. And that is really what we at the IOTA Foundation are focused on. Thank you.
I am ready. Thank you, Dominik. Hey, well, thanks, Dom. So there were a few questions that came in. Thanks, everybody. We'll try to answer as many as we can. But I think, maybe the first one that tries to answer some of the questions you asked is, what is IoT for you? What does it mean, Dominik?
Sorry, I was muted. I think the simplest explanation and the most personal explanation of IoT is really that it's there to make our life simpler and easier. Because essentially all of the systems and infrastructure around us is hugely complex, and oftentimes it has to be operated manually. And now what IoT really enables us is to automate these processes via sensors, via smart devices that have enough processing power, and really via this symbiosis and collaboration between machines. And that's really what's so exciting about the future, because the future is not just about this IoT automation, but really about this IoT autonomy, so that we can even further automate these processes and make our life even simpler and more automated.
So, I mean, looking at this perspective from, the world, I guess we can kind of narrow down the world a little bit and talk about what the top requests are from our corporate partners, especially maybe in regards to the protocol about IOTA.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what DLT has is, and IOTA, what we have is we have a lot of potential, and many of our corporate partners and many participants of our ecosystem understand this potential, and they understand that this is a very bright future where there's no counterparty risks, where there's data integrity, data authenticity, where we can enable machines to pay each other, no longer based on subscription models, but really pay-per-usage models. And all of our corporate partners and obviously the ecosystem is super excited about this future. And I would say they understand the properties of IOTA and the promise of IOTA, but the main request is really that we as a technology and we as a protocol are ready. That means that our software can be utilized in production. And that is really the primary focus of the IOTA Foundation to cross this chasm where today we're still sort of a beta product towards an actual enterprise-ready, production-ready software. And once we cross that, I definitely think that we will bring forward and bring to life this promise of IOTA.
So do you think that the smart decentralization of everything is going to be useful here? Are we close to that even?
So I definitely think that we are moving towards smart decentralization, and that is really further accelerated and actually empowered by distributed ledgers and by IOTA. We cannot continue on with these systems that we have today where the cloud is this central component that essentially enables IoT, because that is not the true Internet of Things that we envision. And what we really need to enable is these distributed ledgers, that they are able to run on those devices, that those devices can leverage this network of trust and build their processes and build their applications on top of that. And to the question of how close we are, I think a lot of this really depends on two factors. The first factor is how far along are we with the production readiness of these technologies? And as I mentioned to your previous question, we really need to make sure that IOTA is production ready and that corporate startups and individuals can build applications on top of it. Now, the second factor that we have to take into account here is really what does it take to integrate such a software product and also this network into the existing systems that many of these large corporations have. Because oftentimes they run on older software architectures, they run on very complex processes, and how and where do distributed ledgers make sense there to enable this smart decentralization vision. And I also saw one question that mentioned, like, are devices going to be more expensive? I actually think that devices through this will be even less expensive, because the resources required in operating a distributed ledger are only your node operation, right? You don't have to host the entire server infrastructure of this network. That means the entire network essentially is this trust layer that you can depend on. As such, the server costs for the corporations that want to leverage or want to build a new business case will be much, much reduced. And that creates a compelling use case for them where they can also factor in this cost saving into their products. And as such, we have those devices that are empowered by IOTA, that are empowered by this trust layer. And through that, are essentially enabling us to go by our day-to-day, because this entire system around us is ubiquitous and runs without any interruption.
So just to follow up, do you think that the dedicated IoT hardware that's going to be low cost is in a near future, or is it far away?
One thing we have to keep in mind is that for distributed ledgers to take off, we need to have dedicated hardware. This is for hardware acceleration of the algorithms that really make up this protocol. And the second one is also about hardware security, where we have those precious keys that enter your wallet, that enter your signatures. Those keys need to be stored very securely and very safely. And the only way to absolutely ensure that today is through hardware security. So there will definitely be dedicated IoT hardware that essentially enables this vision of IOTA. And so what we now need to do as a open source protocol is we need to partner up with those hardware manufacturers to essentially educate them on IOTA and also have serious discussions with them on how we can work on this, on such a rollout, and what kind of products they can offer to the market that are essentially have IOTA inside and embedded inside already.
So do you think that there's a connection there with the consortium-based blockchains, or is that something totally different?
I think it's totally different because the approach of IOTA is really that we want to create an open ecosystem where anybody and anything can essentially participate. We really envision a future where somebody could set up a Raspberry Pi, connect it to their weather station, and then start selling this data from the weather station directly on an open data marketplace. And that is what fundamentally made the internet so great, where you were able to just go on a website and then you can actually build your own website, right? It's really this empowering of people where it's about permissionless innovation. Anybody can create new solutions with the technology that we provide. And now when it comes to permissioned or consortium-based blockchains, I think they're great for initial prototyping, but I don't think that they will ultimately prevail. Because as I mentioned during the presentation, through this approach, we're essentially fragmenting the ecosystem and we are creating new barriers for people to enter and for people to benefit from these technologies.
Well, that obviously begs the question then, can't actors still put false data on the Tangle? And how do you trust anybody then? I think it's a really, really important distinction that we can make with this, can't we?
Yeah, one of the most important principles in DLT is that it's in blockchain is that it's not a solution to everything. If you just focus on inputting data into the Tangle without validating the data itself, you essentially have this garbage in, garbage out principle. And if you then automate your process based on this data, you're running into some serious trouble. And as such, we need to take a holistic approach here, where a solution like IOTA is part of the solution essentially. But we need to also take care of the hardware. We also need to take care of the data validation and analytics. That is why we as a foundation are very much focused on partnering up with other companies that are really specialists in their field, and how we can then combine these different solutions to create this holistic approach towards really real data integrity, data verifiability, and data authenticity.
Oh, I mean, that sounds like a lot for people to grasp in the context of a 30-minute webinar, and we are actually a little over time. However, I think there's one last question among the many that came up in this chat, and I wish we had more time. But I think the most important one that we can ask right now, because you are a specialist, Dominik, is, in your opinion, are there any resources like books or academic literature or even videos that you can tell us about so people can learn more about the topic?
Yeah, like there's many very exciting books that people could read. Like one of the best examples is The Master Switch, where it essentially talks about how we go from a decentralized system towards a centralized system, and how this has been a cycle ever since several hundred years ago. The telephone system is the best example there. And the internet is another good example, where we started out with a very decentralized network, but now it's very clustered and very centralized. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. And that is also why I'm not an advocate for these permission / consortium-based networks. But I think it's a very exciting read. And what I can do is maybe in a follow-up email to all the participants that we include a few further readings that go deeper into this. I would be happy to provide that.
Cool. Well, thanks to all of you for these really interesting and insightful questions, and for attending our first webinar. Sorry for being the bald guy with the low volume mic, but we've got some amazing technical support from the rest of the IOTA team, so I'm not allowed to touch my mic. Anyway, be sure to sign up for next week's session, where we're going to be discussing how smart energy can transform city infrastructure. We'll post the sign up link in the description of this video and send it out to you through the email response after this session ends. So if you want to learn more about IOTA, please be sure to reach out to us over any of the channels, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So finally, Expand your DLT knowledge with the official learning partner of the IOTA Foundation, the IoT1 Academy. And you can get unprecedented access to IOTA onboarding courses for developers and managers in order to quickly gain broad knowledge about IOTA and DLT in general. So you can enjoy amazing learning content co-authored with the IOTA Foundation on training.iota.org.
Yeah. Thank you very much.